Good morning. Welcome to the Science of Mind class here at CSLDallas. I'm Dr. Petra, and I'm so happy to be back. I have had a couple weeks of vacation, which has been really fabulous. Thank you to Faye, our ministerial student, and Dr. Tracy for stepping in for me for the last 2 weeks so that I could have a little rest and renewal. So, as promised, I've already had at least 3 people ask me, you are going to do the second creation story, right? Which is really great because, you don't know whether it's going to be remembered. And so absolutely, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do the second creation story. So for those of you who were not here for the first one, we started with this chapter that we're in, which is basically chapter 1 of the Science of Mind. And it starts with a section on In the Beginning, God. Right? In the beginning, what do we understand about creation? And ultimately, we take a look at how creation is taking place and the creative process. And of course, the fact that we're made in the image and likeness of that infinite reality, so that the way it works is also the way that we work. So we did talk about the first creation story. And took a metaphysical interpretation of it, a metaphysical view of it, and that was 3 Sundays ago, whatever week that was, whatever date that was. So if you're interested and you didn't see it, you can go back on YouTube or Facebook and check it out. So, as you may know, there are 2 separate creation stories in the Hebrew tradition. That is, of course, the seed of the Judeo-Christian culture in which we live today. And many of us were raised in either the Jewish or the Christian faith, and so those are our primary creation stories. They were written at different times, and the first creation story really was actually not as old. It's actually a newer creation story, but it is the sort of overarching creation story of how creation as a whole got here. The second creation story is the one that we are familiar with. And that one has the 7 days, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. The second creation story, which is actually a little bit older in terms of historical, the second creation story really has to do with human beings. And of course, like everybody else, 5,000 years ago, people were asking the same questions that science, philosophy, and religion have been asking all over the world all the time, and that is, what is going on, right? What is going on? Why do bad things happen to good people? How did all this get to be here? What can we do anything about it? Are we just at the mercy of the forces? Or is there something that we're engaged in? And what is the point of our lives? What's the meaning of our lives? Right? And everybody's asking those questions, which is why we say Science of Mind is a correlation of the revelations of religion, the opinions of philosophy, the laws of science, and I've added the practices of psychology as applied to human needs and the aspirations of humankind. Because everybody's asking those same questions and trying to answer them from a slightly different point of view. And every tradition, every culture has creation stories. We do understand them as stories. We understand them as creation stories that speak about an idea that tries to answer some of these questions. But we understand that these ancient myths and legends, they aren't factual. Doesn't mean they're not true. Right? Doesn't mean that they don't have deep and profound truth in them. But it's not so much about the facts of the story as it is, as we have learned from Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, the fact that we as human beings are meaning-making machines, and we use symbology and we use story to help us make sense of the world. And as we saw in the first creation story, anybody who tells you that evolution isn't in the Bible has actually not read that first creation story. because the mystical experience that those priests and shamans had, clearly there was a recognition of the development of, over time, of creation in pretty much exactly the order that we understand it today from a scientific evolutionary point of view. So now we're going to look at the second creation story. We are taught them as if they are like one whole, seamless whole. They're not actually, but it doesn't really matter. The second creation story, right, is the story of Adam and Eve. The story of Adam and Eve. Oh my gosh. All right. So we're going to look at it from a metaphysical point of view, and our metaphysical point of view is, well, let's just say this is the culmination of the great thinking that has been done over the last few centuries that builds on the Gnostic tradition, builds on the mystery schools, builds on developmental psychology, builds on new thought, right? And that is what we mean by metaphysics. That larger understanding that says there's something more going on than just what's happening in the physical world or the particular words or facts of the words that we use. So we're going to start with the, where do we start in this creation story? We start in this fabulous place called Eden, right? And Eden is a paradise. Eden is the paradise where everything is beautiful and perfect. And in this place, God walks and decides that something needs to be created that's another way of thinking about the creation of the earth. And we're no longer interested in the moon and the stars and everything else. We're now interested in how did life get to be, because ultimately we want to ask the question, they're asking the question, well, what about us? How did we get to be here and who are we? So a beautiful place is created, and we hearken back to that the animals are created and the trees are created and all of this beauty is created. And there are two trees and special trees in the garden. Who knows what the two special trees are?
Fruit tree, is it the apple?
Oh, yes, how wonderful. I love that you said that, Jane, because of course, if these stories are from the Middle East, they didn't have apples. But you can see, right, we can see how additions to these stories over time have gotten embedded into our psyche. There is no apple because they didn't have them, right? If it was an actual tree, it was probably either a pomegranate or an olive tree. But despite the fact of the type of fruit, actually there was very specific type of fruit this tree had. The tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Two trees, okay? And all of that's very wonderful, and it's all lovely, and it's very idyllic. And yeah, but God still is unexpressed and a little bored because everything is perfect, right?
Where did I get apple? Is that the American view or the Christian view, or why did I say that? Yeah.
Well, because over time, these stories become subsumed into the culture, right? And so as the Christianity moved north into white European, right, they had apple trees. And so right, and of course Jesus became white and blonde, right? And so that's how that, should we break it to you now? There's no donkeys in the stable. There's no cows and sheep in the stable, right? We don't even know that it was a stable. And so, but the stories become embellished, which helps us understand that it's good to go back and to really look at what's actually there. And because so much of it has been layered on top. Okay, so we have this beautiful idyllic place, and And so God says we need to have somebody to share all of this with. So we're going to create a man. And unlike in the first story, where we have male and female created together, here we have man created first. And how is man created? Right? Taking the dust, the breath of spirit, the breath of life, and man is there. And then gets a little bored, right? Like, oh, I need a helpmate, because the animals aren't really helpmates. They don't really help. So we take the rib out of Adam, and the helpmate is created while Adam is sleeping, and we have Eve, right? So we have, and what do we know about Adam and Eve as they are with God? Well, they walk and talk with God, utterly engaged. They are completely free in the garden. They are fundamentally present to the garden, and God is completely available, right? So, and God says, you can have everything, but just don't eat of the trees. Leave the tree of fruit alone, the tree of life alone, and do not eat the fruit from the tree of good and evil. Oh, well, what do we know happened? Okay, so we have the tree of life, and we have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Oops.
I've heard that described as the tree of discernment.
So we're going to get to that, Brenda. Don't start too fast, okay? Just let me unfold the story. All right? So, and here we have God as present, fully present, and we have Adam and Eve and all the animals and everybody, everything is all, and this is a paradise. Everything is perfect. Everything is perfect. It only rains, it only rains at night. It's a perfect 72 degrees.
Everybody gets along.
Well, there's not a whole lot of everybody, but everybody gets along, right? Good. Okay. So we have these trees, and Adam and Eve wandering around, and of course, what do we have? We have the snake in the tree, and the snake says to Eve, if you will eat of the tree of this, if you will eat of this fruit, you will be like gods. So one of the things we'll notice about this story is how, what shall we say, familiar with human beings the writers of this story are, right? Because you know damn well we're all curious. Don't go through that door. Oh, let's see what's behind it, right? Don't do that. Oh, let's try and see what happens, right? The minute that somebody says don't do it, you gotta, right? You gotta do it, you gotta try it, so inevitably, so we're gonna see some real hints in the understanding of human nature, right? This deep curiosity, this unwillingness, sort of a little bit of a rebellious spirit, and a desire for exploration and discovery. So the snake says, come on, you'll be like gods. And Eve eats, right? And then what does she do? Shares it. Well, she says, come on, Adam, let's do it. She eats, and Adam eats of this fruit. Oh, not east. Eats of this fruit. The fruit is not actually named in the Bible, the type of fruit it is. So they eat, and what happens? Who remembers? What happens when they eat? They discover that they are naked. And so they clothe themselves with fig leaves. So if you've ever gone to any place in Italy And you see all the fabulous statues and all the men who are beautifully naked until the little fig leaf is placed. That was after the Christians swept through, and it's from here that they got the fig leaves to cover the anatomy. So they discovered they were naked, and what happened when God came? They hid. And because of these two events, God knew that they had eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So we have this sort of storyline here, right? And what happens? Out of Eden. They're out of Eden. And they're cursed with the pain of humanity. You will work by the sweat of your brow. You will have pain in childbirth, right?
First time we see a punishing God. I think that's interesting.
Yes. So we're going to stick with the storyline because we're going to actually interpret it very differently, right? Because part of what's answering part of the question here that's being answered is we all have an innate sense that at one point life was beautiful. We all have an innate sense that there is a kind of life that we're searching for. The question is, why don't we have it? So this story, one can see to a certain extent, was written backwards to answer this question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is life hard? And with Locke and Hume, right, we can say, as those philosophers from that particular time period, life is nasty, brutish, and short. If we come from, so they have been expelled, right? And the question that is being answered in this story is, why is it so hard? Why is life so hard? And the answer to start out with is, we must be being punished for something. So one of the things we realize when we look at these stories is the question is, are we reading the story from inside the story? We now have a punishing God. Or are we reading the story from outside the story? What question is this story trying to answer? What guidance is this story trying to give to humanity, to the people? Because remember, these stories were created over time by priests and shamans who were having deep mystical experiences, utterly close to nature, very connected to their communities, and they were searching for answers. Why is it so hard? Why is life so challenging? And because now we know that life is challenging, right? I don't know if we think that the sequoia tree knows that life is challenging, right? It just is life. Does the butterfly know it's only going to last so many days? It's just life. So not only do we have this experience, but we know this experience. Okay, so let's go back. If we look at this this as answering the question, why is life like this? In the science of mind, in New Thought, and in the Gnostic traditions, and in the mystery schools, they all say the same thing. Just as we talked in the original creation story, we are made in the image and likeness of the divine. That means we have the DNA of the Creator. Therefore, we too are creative. We too are creators in our own lives. But if we can't learn to discover that for ourselves, if we aren't left alone to discover that for ourselves, we don't get to decide what it is we're going to create. the apple tree can only create another apple. Can't decide to wander off and go be a lily. Do you see? So when we think of this space right here, right, when we think of the development of a child or the development of an individual human being, we all start out in this space. A child up until they're 9 months old doesn't actually know that their mother's body isn't part of their own. Every need is met, hopefully. Of course, it's not true for every child, unfortunately. But in the best of all possible worlds, every need is met, everything is taken care of. And over time, what happens? What are the terrible twos all about? Yeah, no. A separation. I'm not you. I'm not like you. You can't tell me what to do. I don't want to. No, no, no. Yes. Oh, I'm not supposed to do that? Let's go find out, right? So, as Brenda said earlier, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the beginning of the awareness of the pairs of opposites, as the Hindus talk about, opposites, which is in our understanding of human beings, the ability to choose between one thing and another. If you don't have a pairs of opposites, there's nothing to choose from. Do you want to go right or left? It doesn't have to be good and evil, right? The Hindus understood that it wasn't a moral or ethical understanding of the pairs of opposites. It's just everything in the physical realm has an opposite, up and down, hot and cold, in and out, left and right. Do this or do that, right? They're not always paired, but they illuminate the fact that that choices are constantly available to us. And we begin the process of understanding that the creative process starts with choices. So what does the snake say? If you eat of the fruit, you will understand the power of your choosing. And you will be like gods. It is our choices that begin the creative process. Let there be light. Let there be. Let there be. Let there be. Okay? So, you will be like gods. And Eve says, oh, that sounds fun. Let's do it. Come on, Adam. And Adam says, oh, I don't know, but okay, let's do it. And then God says, oh, what are you doing? And what did Adam say? She made me do it.
I hated that story.
And what did Eve say? Oh, the snake made me do it. I love it. I love it. Okay, let's be real. How many times have we done this ourselves? Right? I think there's such a deep understanding of the human condition. One, we're ridiculously curious. And two, we hate taking responsibility. Right? Now, we're going to get to what was done with the story in a little bit. But ultimately, right? And in this piece, so we see this, so here we see, right? We see curiosity, but we also see a lack of responsibility, what we might call blame. And what happens in recognizing the pairs of opposites? Well, no, first before that. They discover they're separate from Eden, right? They now realize that there is something, skin and body, that separates them from this Edenic oneness, where they used to just walk and talk with God and didn't think anything of it. We would call this, let's use another, we would call this unconscious oneness, which when you look in the eyes of a child, you see, right? Every time that little 2-year-old just sparkles and glows, and just doesn't matter that they had a meltdown 3 minutes ago, right? In that right? And you just see it. There it is. There is life and love and God expressing itself, right? Unconscious oneness. And then the terrible twos and the terrible threes, I'm not that. I'm not that. I'm not so protected by my mother. I'm not my mother. I don't want to do what my dad wants me to do. I don't want to be like my sister. I begin to want to be like myself. And so before thinking of the fear and shame, right, is the clothing. And what do? Do we not clothe ourselves in our personas? It's just the individuation, right? See, when we look at it from the outside of the story, there's nothing pejorative about this story. It's all the way it's been interpreted. There's nothing pejorative about this story, right? This is individuation, which, as Ernest Holmes calls, a sense of separation. Notice, it's not separation. It's a sense of separation. And from a philosophical point of view, right, you cannot have self-awareness if you do not have a self that can be aware. For a self to be aware, there has to be something other than the self to say, this is the self and that is not. Without the sense of separation, there's no possibility for self-awareness. There's just, right? Which was what we do when we go into that deep meditative experience and what the flowers and the birds and the trees are doing. They're just ising. They're just being. They're just being themselves. And it doesn't matter if it's struck by lightning and half of it falls over and there's one little twig that's still got green. The tree doesn't go, I'm so embarrassed. I feel so bad about myself. It just is. And whatever keeps growing, keeps growing. And it's lovely and it's wonderful. This sense of separation is the necessary, it's necessary, right? And so here we have the unconscious, let's see, got to spell it right. I guess I'm making them in red. Let's make it in red. Here we have then the unconscious life of separation. In our states and stages of consciousness, for those of you who have been going through our journey of awakening with us together, this is the first state and stage of consciousness. Life happens to me. She made me do it. The snake made me do it. Oh my God. Right? Life happens to me. And when life happens to me, sucks, doesn't it? It is so painful. So here we are. And good enough, the story doesn't end there. So the whole rest of the Hebrew tradition and all the way into the Christian tradition, right? We have Abraham and Sarah, Cain and Abel, we have Noah, we have Job, we have, Isaac, and we can go on and on and on, and Jacob, and blah, 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 and all the way to the end where we have Jesus. What is the seminal moment in each and every one of these stories? Choose. Choose God or not. Over and over and over again. From our point of view, since we don't anthropomorphize God anymore, we don't need to anthropomorphize God anymore, we might say choose alignment with truth or my own fears and needs. Choose alignment with love and the life that's seeking to express as me, or choose, I better get mine before anybody gets theirs, because if I don't, I'm not going to get what I need, right? So over and over and over again, Noah's laughed at. What are you doing, building an ark? How many of you have ever decided to do something and your friends and family are like, what are you doing? Are you out of your mind? What will people think? What will happen? How will you be supported? Are you crazy? Over and over and over and over again. And you see, if we see it from inside the story, it looks like God is testing. But if we see it from outside the story, we realize that life is forever offering us the choice over and over and over again. And what happens when Abraham chooses? His life is multiplied in abundance, right? When Noah chooses, he survives the flood, right? When Job chooses, not only is everything taken away, but everything is given back and multiplied. Over and over and over and over and over again, we see. Even in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, if you can find 50 good people, I won't kill it. If you can find 10 good people, okay, fine. If you can find one. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be perfect. It doesn't matter how far we've fallen. It doesn't matter how poorly we have chosen. One turn is all it takes. One turn is all it takes. Over and over and over again. And so what we have here is, I'm doing this in red, sorry. What we have here is the growing conscious awareness of choosing, whoopsie, in the story it would be God, I would say choosing oneness. Over and over and over and over again, choosing oneness over separation, right? And what do we have in the story of Jesus? So here we have, I'm doing it in red, ha 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 ha. Someone who lives from conscious oneness. How many of you have been parents or have seen this in your friends who, when they become parents, all of a sudden the same words that your mother or dad said that you were so rebellious of, you're like, oh, it's coming right out of my mouth. Oh, that's why they were saying don't run with scissors. Don't run out in front of the street. That's why they said those things, right? And many of the good things that were laid down, we begin to take up again because we are now taking them up as conscious aware beings. We're choosing the values, the thoughts, the life that it was offered to us, hopefully in a generally good experience, right? We're not talking about trauma and abuse and things like that, obviously. And we start making choices that are from that place. And because this is the spiritual story, right, our lives, and let us say this is not only the story of the individual, but this is the story of humanity. I fear we're still back here. I'm hoping we're a little closer here, that we're beginning to see the impact of our choices. And that we start being willing to take responsibility. Because we begin to take responsibility for our creative power, right? Think about the times that Jesus said, no, it's not my time. No, I'm not going to do it now. This isn't quite right. And then other times he was like, be healed. Let's have the miracle. Let's do the deal without question, right? Living from conscious oneness. And we know that when we live from conscious oneness, we are now having the experience of presence, the experience of power. We're living as co-creators. So we can see this entire story as it's a powerful, and this is of course why this particular book and these particular traditions have lasted for so long, because there's deep spiritual and psychological truth in them. The problem, of course, is that they've been interpreted in so many different ways, right? So we can go back here, this piece right here, I'm sure present company accepted, right? This is the advent of patriarchy, right? The snake was the most honored symbol of the goddess, and the reason for that is because the snake slithered on the ground as close to Gaia as you could get. No arms, no legs to hold off of the mother. And the snake was considered the most sacred and precious symbol of the goddess traditions. And, of course, the women were the priestesses. They were not whores in the temples. They were the priestesses. And in the goddess traditions, right, the priestess and the king, who was also representing the horned god or the green man, they would go out into the fields in the spring, and they would make love in the fields in the spring. And the man would pull out and he would deposit his seed into the soil as a gift to the mother and as a blessing for the fertility of the land so that the crops would grow, which is why we have the story, which is why we have the admonition, do not cast your seed out, right? Because anything that smacked of the goddess traditions had to be either subverted or subsumed, which is why we have Easter, which is the same thing as which follows the goddess traditions and why it moves with the full moon. That should be a clue, right? And so out of this co-opting patriarchy, and of course we also have the devil, right? The devil is simply the horned god made into a negative figure, right? That's how you do it. You either make it evil or you subsume it, which is what they did, of course, with the Christmas tree and the holly and the ivy and things like that. Simply took the ancient traditions of the north, of Northern Europe, and just subsumed them. And said, oh, yes, well, the green is for eternal life and the red is for the blood of Christ. No, actually, it was much, much, much older than that. And this is what we do over time, right? And so then we have St. Augustine. I grew up learning, teaching. I actually studied him, calling him St. Augustine. And St. Augustine is the one who, in the 4th century CE, he was the one who declared women incapable of being pure because of this story. He bought this story hook, line, and sinker. Patriarchy was already 2,500 to 3,000 years old. Patriarchy arose with agriculture, and he bought it hook, line, and sinker. So it's the woman's fault here, not because the story declares it, but because that became the narrative, right? And that narrative was chosen in the 400s CE by the Catholic, the Christian, what was then the Christian Church, which is now we know the Catholic Church.
Which was really the Roman Church.
Well, the Roman Catholic Church, right? That was.
It followed their hierarchy, which was very patriarchal.
Yes, right. Yes. So it's all, but the Catholic Church became that, right, and came right out of patriarchy. Not just Roman, also Greek, also lots of other places. So not just purely Roman by any means. Also Hebraic. The Hebrew tradition is very patriarchal. So it's not just purely Roman, right? But all of that thousands of years of patriarchy made it possible to make Eve the villain. Which is the seed of all the reasons why women shouldn't be priests and blah, 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 and priests shouldn't marry and all that nonsense, right? And so, whereas we know from the first creation story, they created them, male and female, created them, male and female, in the image and likeness of the divine, of the one, right? So in the story itself is the key to who these actually are, right? And again, if we're thinking about it from inside the story, it's easy to get these interpretations of a punishing God or oh my God, the Eve is bad and all of these kinds of things. But when we see it from the outside, we can look at the story, we can ask the question, what question are they trying to answer? And not only this, how is it like this? How do we get from here back to here? And you can't, like Freud said, even though his idea is that we all want to crawl back into the womb, right, and be taken care of. It's never going to happen, and you can't do it. It's the whole process of self-awareness, human self-awareness, which we get with all these early stories, which are all about wealth, and they're all about those kinds of things. And then we get further and further along, and we see the stories become more and more about the spiritual truths until we get to Jesus. Couldn't care less about wealth per se, always knew he had everything that he needed, right? But it was about a way of being in the world. When you see me, you see the Father. Now there's this complete unity of the human expression with the spiritual being. And the whole point of this process, as Science of Mind understands, is that this is the point of creation. Creation has been working to grow and evolve an organ that can know itself as the universe individualized, and now can consciously take our place as co-creators, which we're clearly still working on. Because we sure like to blame them, whoever the them is. We've got lots of thems we can blame. And we don't want to take responsibility for the impact of our actions as humanity on the planet, on women, on people that are different than us, on all the ways in which we still believe that this sense of separation is real, right? And so this whole story is about the overcoming of that sense of separation as reality, but as a sense of separation until we live in this conscious oneness, this place of conscious unity. And ultimately, we can, look at the story of Jesus as the hero's journey. We can see that there is still a somewhat of a belief that the good die young, and if you're really, right, and if you're really out there, that we need a martyr. But it's just fear talking, right? And humanity will make those choices over and over and over again until we stop being afraid. Till we stop being afraid and we begin to know who we are. And we are making strides and inroads despite what the media says. We are making strides and inroads, and our job is to be part of that story, to make our lives part of that story. So I'm going to be talking about that in 30 minutes. All right. So another preview of my. This is the preview of my New Testament Bible and the New Testament from a metaphysical point of view. So when we offer it in the next year or so, please do join me. It's super fun. Because we want to dispel the garbage and we want to see the jewels, because there are jewels in every spiritual tradition. All right, so thank you for joining me this morning. We'll see you soon. Bye for now. Yay!